Khadija, and I'm going to continue to talk and teach about the natural principles of life because this is knowledge that should be handed down through our cultural systems or some type of education or religious systems. And this type of foundational information will help us to understand these different systems that we live within because these are foundational principles of nature. Because everything is built off of nature, just like we build buildings out of natural elements, natural um, forms, third dimensional forms, physical forms, flesh forms. We also build in the spirit. There's also spiritual forms, and this goes into the science of the spirit, esoteric knowledge, and this is where we don't. What's been so much lacking from life because we don't even have a fuller experience of life just based off of not knowing and the way that we think, believe, and behave in this existence, especially collectively. So, um, each of us that can, we do our part. For me, it's through knowledge, it's through the things that I studied, being a scholar, being very much learned, and through my life experience and through my intuition, my inner knowing, my connection to spirit. And that's because I'm able to identify spirit in its many forms. So this is knowledge that we should have came into as children growing up in our family structure, and we can um, once we start to identify things of the spirit, then we can identify how our family structure and communities have gotten into the way that it is existing today, and that is through knowledge of the spirit. Um, but this is how the best way to identify spirit is through knowledge, knowing, because knowing gives you something to stand on. It gives you a firm foundation um, and able to stand and not fall through, have leverage um, over your circumstances and situations in life in regards to our individual spirits, because we all have our individual path here. It's not a spiritual saying being on your own journey or your own path. No, it's just the natural essence of life. We all are individuals and we all are living individual lives. So just a way to call our individual lives is a name that we use is path or journey. There's many different names for these things. This is why the word is very powerful. So I want to continue to teach about these things because these are definitely things that will help benefit our everyday lives. And these are things that we can do individually to change the circumstances collectively. Because once the collective has a more broader perspective of seeing life, then there's a broader awareness and more of an energy of change through collective energy. So knowledge is a big way of identifying that is because the knowledge of spirit, esoteric knowledge is not widely known for many reasons, positive and negative. It has to do with us individually, our own individual path, our own individual karma, and also the lack of information through omission and covers and veils and spells and all other different type of shit that's going on out here. Information has been covered in a sense, but it's always here because we have a natural connection to that because we are spirit. We are of spirit living within spirit. Life, you don't like the word spirit, we are life. That essence that keeps us existing is a life principle. It's also an existence of life that we don't necessarily have the ability to see unless we are able to identify or sense its forms that are happening simultaneously. It's not separate. Only way that it's separate is the way that we think about it. That's why our minds are very powerful in the information that we hold and the information we have been given, not of natural principles, not of life. We have learned through other outside sources, and outside sources have had hold over our community and our knowledge and our practices and our traditions and our ways of connecting to life and source. So this is why people go into these religious systems to find their connection to life or source. But you're not supposed to be not and not even supposed to, because you could practice your religion however you choose to, but it's not supposed to be a place of standstill. The church is there to serve the church, not necessarily its people. And we can see that in our everyday lives, because look at the wealth of the church and not necessarily the wealth of the people. There are churches everywhere, but there is poverty everywhere as well. So at some point, we have to start looking at the church in its many different ways, and it's the way that we think about it. The way that we think about church is even limited because we are not sure of what the church is and its foundings, its foundational principles. And once we can identify that those foundational principles are based off of natural principles, we can see how these elements and buildings and forms have been used in order for a being's will, how these things have moved throughout time, chronology. There's many different events and experiences that have happened, and just a narrative is a perspective on those things that is widely adopted, and that becomes a whole ass belief system that people adopt into their existence, their everyday life, and it becomes a window of seeing. But you have to be able to identify the spirit to know how that works, and a lot of people do. And this is the important thing, is bringing these existences together, because there's definitely a religious worldview and a spiritual worldview. These things coexist all at the same time. It's not like one is over the other. The only one is one holds more power, because it's institutionalized. It's very much systematic and very much ingrained in. There's so many in words that I could use. I'm talking about in, within words. It has to do with the within, the spirit. That'll explain infiltrated. That goes deep. So these institutions are very much purposeful, and that's seeing the spirit behind things. The spirit has to do with the purpose, not has to, also has to. The spirit also, we can't limit spirit because it's not something we can have a hold on. I can't grab spirit and give it to you. I can only give you descriptors or a story form in order for me to give you my perspective of spirit. So that just lets you know that that's not something in physicality. That's something that is transferring in a spiritual form. There's many different names that we could call this, metaphysics and all this stuff, and it doesn't have to be that complicated when we can understand things from a spiritual point of view. Just seeing between the light and the dark. It's the art of separation, a way of seeing. Sight is very important to understand, not just in a sense of religious system, belief system. Sight is important to understand for our individual being. This ain't about no belief system. This is how we are able to understand these belief systems, and is when we have a connection to ourself and know our place within them. So, but you have to be able to know how to read. And part of being able to know how to read is even knowing what reading is. Reading is not just a physical thing. Reading is a spiritual thing. Just like when girls use that as a way of reading other girls, or other people. Reading, telling a story, reading a story off of a being. That's another form of reading. That's a spiritual aspect of using that energy of reading. Reading is very much a spiritual thing. Reading between the lines, seeing the spirit behind the physical forms and circumstances. These things are happening simultaneously, but we're not recognizing them in our everyday lives. Oh my God, and I haven't even gotten to the calendar yet. That's because I can go deep in these things. But when it comes to time, this is a way of lifting veils and breaking spells, is by seeing how things naturally happen, because we have been so much on an artificial platform that we are very much desensitized to the changes that are happening rapidly around us, especially because of the lack of knowledge. So when it comes to lack of knowledge, here's a perfect example of lack by the new year. Happy 2022 to you, celebrating the getting ready for the new year in springtime, the time of birth, the beginning when things are new, made anew. So that's actually the springtime, not Capricorn in January 1st. That's artificial, because once we know that the natural, right? Because you can't have artificial unless you have the actual natural source first before you can even have the artificial. The source already existed before the artificial. So these are how things, the artificial is built upon. It's by its natural principles. So natural time of birth, new creativity, um, fruit, bearing fruit, plans, goals. That's a spiritual aspect of a time of birth. Plans, goals. That's why we have New Year's resolution, but that's so limiting, and that's not in harmony of nature, because having New Year's in January on the 1st is the time in the season of death, ruled by Saturn. And that goes deep, just understanding Saturn energy and how that has everything to do with us as well, individually and collectively. So not enough time to say everything. January. Okay, let's look at this calendar, because calendars are very important, because we don't get to understand why calendars are. They teach us how to use them in our educational systems, right? But they don't teach us why they are, why we have them, why, and definitely not why individually we use calendars, and there are many uses of calendars. See, calendar is deep. It's not just a tracking of days, it's a tracking of so much more. We put a limit on what a calendar is just by tracking the days. This is more of a fuller calendar of the years. It's spread apart in our little planners that they give us, but it's lacking a whole lot of information, and it is the source of which they make the calendar. This is the thing that upsets me about people who are religious and don't respect astrology, and not recognizing or knowing for themselves that they're using astrology every day when they are watching the time, and when they are planning things out in their calendars, when they are using calendars. Calendars are a form of astrology, a tracking of the stars, a tracking of the sun mainly. And this is the form of manipulation, because there are many other bodies, energies that we can keep track of, and are keeping tracking of. Okay, these things are being tracked and known. That's why they're able to produce these things for you, because it's already set in stone. It's already an artificial platform in which to build information, and you're not doing it with your own spirit. It's 12:56. Okay, so just really quickly, a calendar. I'm gonna have to do a part 2. I'll put this on my page if you're interested, because this is shit that we should have known when we were in elementary school. Okay, elements has to do with the elements. The elements aren't just physical thing on a periodic table. Elements has to do with our spiritual makeup. The star map is also a representation of the many elements that the universe holds and that we hold. This is why they're able to use the periodic tables, based off of this information and the observation of science of life, observing life and studying. And possibilities, statistics, mathematics, calculations, navigations is all based off of spiritual foundational principles. Not only the science of forms and physicality, third dimension, but in forms of spiritual, there's spiritual forms dealing with the different bodies. These are also words that we use to call forms as bodies. There's many different words: perimeters, circumferences, holes, 1, 2, 3, trinities. So there's many words, and these are how people are able to use covers and manipulate, is through the words and the lack thereof, and the manipulation of words. Shit is deep. I'm gonna have to do a part 2.